Hello! In this video, I'll be discussing the next chapter in Marx's Wage, Labor, and Capital. In this section, Marx talks about what capital is, how it is created, how it defines capitalist society, and why it, and consequently capitalism, needs the working class in order to exist and propagate. First of all, what is capital? The first answer Marx gives to this question is the answer of the economists. Capital is simply the raw materials, the instruments of labor, and the means of subsistence which are used to produce new raw materials, new instruments of labor, and new means of subsistence. The interesting bit of all this, though, is that all the things we just mentioned, raw materials, etc., are created by labor. They are all products of labor. Marx calls them accumulated labor. This accumulated labor, capital, is itself used to produce more capital. To help us wrap our heads around capital, Marx uses an example of old American slavery. He asks us, what is an African slave? Some would say that he's a man of the black race. But this explanation isn't good enough. A man of the black race is just a man of the black race. Only under certain special conditions does he, or anyone else for that matter, become a slave. In the same vein, a machine that spins cotton is simply a machine that spins cotton. Only under certain special conditions does it become capital. Away from these special conditions, it ceases to be capital. Marx says, torn away from these conditions, it is as little capital as gold is itself money or sugar is the price of sugar. Marx goes on to talk about how humans interconnect during production. Now, this may seem random, but bear with me. Marx ties this all together very nicely. Human beings work upon nature through, for example, turning of raw materials into other things useful to us in some way, and human beings also work upon one another. What does this mean, exactly? Well, our work depends on each other. As Marx says, human beings produce only by working together in a specified manner and reciprocally exchanging their activities. In order to produce, they enter into definite connections and relations to one another, and only within these social connections and relations does their influence upon nature operate, does production take place. These social relations between these human beings, these producers, and the conditions under which they exchange their activities, their share in the total act of production, changes with the changing means of production. Now, to help us understand this, Marx gives a military example that beautifully illustrates this concept. With the discovery of a new instrument of warfare, for example the firearm, the whole internal organization of the army was necessarily altered. The relations within which individuals compose an army and can work as an army were transformed, and the relation of different armies to another was likewise changed. In the same way, the social relations between human beings and the conditions under which they exchange their activities changes with changing means of production. Why is this important? Well, these relations of production, and the way human beings relate to each other in regard to production, form certain social relations at a definite stage of historical development. They form a society with peculiar, distinctive characteristics. Each stage of society, of human society, from slave society through feudalism and finally to our current capitalist society, each stage of society are totalities, collections of these social relations, which mark a certain stage in the development of the history of mankind. Now, capital itself is one of these social relations. It's a capitalist relation of production, a relation of production of capitalist society. We have already established that raw materials, means of production, and means of subsistence, etc. are capital. However, capital does not only consist of material products, it also consists of exchange values. All the products of which capital consists of are commodities, as we have established earlier. As Marx puts it, capital, consequently, is not only a sum of material products, it is a sum of commodities, of exchange values, of social magnitudes. Capital will stay the same whether we put cotton in the place of wool, or copper in the place of iron, or steamships in the place of railroads. Capital will remain the same as long as the cotton, the copper, the steamships, etc. have the same exchange value, the same price as the wool or the iron or the railroads. Marx says, the bodily form of capital may transform itself continually, while capital does not suffer the least alteration. Now we have established that all capital is a sum of commodities, a sum of exchange values. However, not every sum of commodities, of exchange values, is capital itself. The following point Marx makes is something we've already touched on in previous videos, so I'll just directly quote from the book. Every sum of exchange values is an exchange value. Each particular exchange value is a sum of exchange values. For example, a house worth £1,000 is an exchange value of £1,000. A piece of paper worth 1 penny is a sum of exchange values of 100 1/100ths of a penny. Products which are exchangeable for others are commodities. The definite proportion in which they are exchangeable forms their exchange value, or, expressed in money, their price. The quantity of these products can have no effect on their character as commodities, as representing an exchange value, as having a certain price. Whether a tree be large or small, it remains a tree. Whether we exchange iron in pennyweights or in hundredweights for other products, does this alter its character, its being a commodity or exchange value? According to the quantity, it is a commodity of greater or of lesser value, of higher or of lower price. I think this is all self-explanatory. If you don't understand anything, just ask me a question in the comments. Now, Marx asks us, how does a sum of commodities, a sum of exchange values, become capital? Marx himself beautifully answers this by saying, thereby that, meaning capital, as an independent social power, as the power of a part of society, it preserves itself and multiplies by exchange with direct living labor. The existence of a class which has nothing but the ability to work is a necessary presupposition of capital. It is only the dominion of past accumulated, materialized labor over immediate living labor that stamps the accumulated labor with the character of capital. Basically, what Marx here is saying is accumulated labor becomes only capital once it feeds off of living labor. Capital isn't accumulated labor that serves living labor as a way for a new production. In fact, it's the very opposite. Living labor serves accumulated labor as a means of preserving and multiplying its exchange value. In the next chapter, Marx goes on to talk about the relation of wage labor to capital. From now on, we'll be getting into the real meat of this essay. I hope you'll join me for that, and that's it for this one. Thank you for watching.